And we are live. Thank you for joining for our compliance roundtable here. We're joined by many great panelists for our discussion today. Just a few little housekeeping notes before we get started. If you're watching the replay of this presentation, please skip a few minutes ahead. We start in here in about a minute and a half. And if you're watching right now, please drop into the chat. Let us know what vertical you're you're in, where you're calling in from. Lastly, let us know if there's anything specific you're trying to learn today regarding compliance and leveraging this data to increase the ROI or improving your cannabis business operations. Our questions today are going to help guide the content of the presentation. So again, please drop your questions into the chat. And another disclaimer before we get started, the information contained in this presentation is meant for guidance purposes only and not as professional legal or tax advice. And further, it does not give any personalized legal, tax, investment, or any business advice in general. So we'll get started here in about a minute. So thank you for joining. We'll look for some comments coming in here. All right. Excellent. Guys, thank you for joining. It's good to see everybody here. This is a lot of good stuff going to come up in this conversation, I'm sure of it. All right. So we're here, but got 17, 20. All right. Good amount of people joining in here live. Thank you for joining live. All right. So we're going to get started. It's the top of the hour. I don't want to delay any further here. So just before we get started, today we're joined by very many smart panelists from a variety of disciplines specializing in the cannabis industry. You can find the links to their websites in the description of this video on YouTube. And please make sure you go and check them out, learn a little bit more about the companies and the people behind those companies. Now, our goal today is to deliver a ton of value and help you better to understand the incredible value of leveraging your cannabis compliance data. I'm going to be covering the chat, so if you have any questions, drop those into the chat platform of your choice. And then we're going to be jumping in. So RJ, please take it away. I'll let you go ahead and run the presentation here from going forward.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to first start off by thanking Jim, of course, and everyone from Green Road CPAs for their participation in this and helping us to produce this and taking lead on this. So thank you for that. And thanks to everybody behind the scenes that's also made this possible. It's been a long time coming after a couple months of working on this. And as Jim said, great group of folks here today to talk about generating ROI from that pesky compliance data that tends to be a fly in the ointment, but really is a gold mine if you're aware of that and ready to unlock it. So to kind of lay the groundwork here and also top level introduce everyone that's going to be involved in the conversation, we're going to start off with a little bit about the history of compliance data and the start in Colorado and the progression of compliance as it relates to Metrc. And also the future of compliance, what we're looking at as new states come online, as well as federal legalization, how compliance will play a role there. We'll be joined by Lewiskoski from Metrc, COO of Metrc for that, kind of to kick us off. As Jim mentioned, we'll be doing a lot of question pauses. So if you have questions, drop them in anytime. We're going to stop after every segment just to check those questions, answer anything that may have come up from sort of that segment. We don't want to put anything too far into the back and lose the flow of what everyone here from an audience perspective wants to see. So once we have the conversation with Metrc, with Lewis from Metrc, we'll kind of set the table and then move forward and introduce the rest of the panel. We have several people here today, as you can see across the top bar. We've got Jared Shulman, who's the CEO of Lendica. We've got Marko here from GreenGrowth, one of the senior audit partners, Stefan Johnson, who is the CTO of Outspoke, and also part of the firm that I am part of Outspoke as well, just so everyone knows that. And then last and not least, Marcus Williams from Community Growth Partners, as well as Rebel Dispensary out in Massachusetts. So we'll go through kind of an introduction to everyone in the panel as we get to that second segment, get a little bit deeper into what really triggers sort of everyone's interest in compliance data, and then we'll look at how everyone is either whether they're an ancillary firm, how they're helping their clients to generate ROI, and then we will kind of finish with an interaction with Marcus, and we'll look at the license side as well, and how license holders like community growth partners and Marcus are using this data to make better business decisions in the real world beyond just what we're doing here and as support pieces and service pieces. So Lewiskoski, we're going to start with you. I would love to just touch on your background a little bit and talk about sort of the history, the roots of compliance as you saw it from Colorado and how we kind of have come to today, let's call it.
think you're on mute.
I'm notorious for that. So that was almost a foregone conclusion that I was going to do that at least once on this time. So again, Lewiskoski, Chief Operating Officer. Thank you so much, RJ, for having me on your talk today. A little bit about me. I got my start in the cannabis industry as a government official in Colorado. I was working for the casino gambling division there. And at one point in 2009, we started having conversations about starting to license a lot of the businesses that were already operating in cannabis through the Department of Revenue, which is where the casino gambling division was located. I ended up transitioning over to the new agency when we were first starting to license those businesses in 2009. And by 2013, when we first started legal adult sales, I had become the director of the marijuana enforcement division. And was largely responsible for helping set that agency up and get statutes and regulations implemented. But I also helped lead the teams that drafted all of the original regulations, many of which are still in force there. So that was that's my background, RJ, and it's nice to have everybody here. I appreciate everybody showing up.
Yeah, and so you've been involved in compliance when it comes to this compliance data set and the uniqueness of the supply chain here in cannabis that really, there aren't any other supply chains really, especially from a CPG standpoint that have this. So can you touch on sort of, the role that you see compliance having played and the transition that you're seeing now with, things about like we're going to talk about today. Did you guys foresee when Metrc really started to take hold? Did you foresee these kinds of uses of it, or did you just see it as a sort of a compliance solution, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, like so many other things in the cannabis industry, the concept of track and trace and accumulating compliance data is something that is certainly evolving and certainly evolved from what it was in 2013 and 2014 to what it is today. In those early days, the primary focus was to be able to distinguish between what was legal and what was illegal, because the two plants next to each other are indistinguishable from one another otherwise. So the concern is that the credibility of the regulated framework would never get established if the ecosystem that surrounded the regulatory structure wasn't able to somehow identify the difference between legal and illegal and prevent inversion and diversion into the regulated framework. So all that said was that's still an issue today. I think that's still an area of focus, but it certainly evolved from that time. So like the next step in the process was for regulators to start thinking about how they could create some efficiencies with how they actually regulated. There was a lot of concerns that were shared, rightfully so, from the industry about the burden of compliance and concerns about how costly it could be for their business if it wasn't done correctly. So we started using the system for discovering ways to be more efficient. One of probably the most prominent aspects of the business is the ability to collect this granular data all the way from baby plants to point of sale, but then also be able to trace back surgically if a product or products is making someone sick. And happy to talk a little bit more about that in the context of the vaping crisis if we get there. But just creating efficiency and regulation. But also too, we were starting to learn more and more about cannabis businesses. And so what the company did is work really hard to try, to the extent that it can, there's still reporting requirements, but collect data in stride, the compliance data in stride with the business practices that many of the licensees were using at the time and have evolved over time. And then, I think the other thing that's really important, and I know that we're going to get into this a little bit more, is there seemed to be a lot of innovation that happened around the compliance data. So there's this incredible data set. It creates this transparent supply chain for the government actors, but it also creates a really interesting and usable data set for licensees. And so what we've seen is just a lot of innovation around the data. Like, how can you create efficiencies with business systems that licensees already use while reporting data at the exact same time and trying to like reduce that burden of compliance all the way across the board. And so we know now that even though this was initially intended to be a data tracking system for the purposes of preventing criminal activity and or limiting criminal activity in the regulated framework, it's become much more than that. And it's been really interesting to see it turn into like a government system that's meant to control the market and have it turn into something that's also like really informing a lot of things that are happening within the cannabis industry writ large.
Yeah, it's pretty to touch on that really quickly. It's pretty cool to see sort of the progression of that, right? Again, it's that fly in the ointment thing that starts off as this sort of negative, and now here we are, a group of several companies talking about a variety of uses for it, and I think it's fair to say supported by Metrc, right? I mean, I think is it fair to say that Metrc is excited about sort of these people like the panelists here using the data in the manner that it is, and sort of creating a more sort of reason to do better with your compliance, if you will?
Yeah, I certainly remember some of the preliminary conversations about creating the application programming interface, or the API for other companies to be able to integrate in and send data to Metrc and pull data from Metrc. I remember there being a fair amount of apprehension around that when we first started having those conversations. Of course, that was before I was with the company. Flash forward to where we are today, and there's this like pretty incredible ecosystem of technology that exists within the regulated framework, and many of them share and pull information from Metrc. It's kind of like a control tower that's used by the regulators for all of the data in the system to help inform public policy and potential challenges that industry might be facing, or compliance issues. But it's also like turning into this incredible data set that can be used by many different businesses. So no, we didn't anticipate that right off the bat. There was, I think, some reluctance, but looking back now, we certainly appreciate the fact that there's so many businesses and really bright minds out of the tech industry and other specialty areas that are really leveraging this comprehensive regulatory framework in a really positive way. And I think it's worth noting that in a lot of ways, I think cannabis has, and legalization in many of the states, have created really resilient supply chains. And if we haven't learned anything from COVID, we've certainly learned that our supply chain system outside of cannabis, almost everywhere, is not nearly as resilient as we thought it was. And so it's going to be really, we're really excited to see how this can continue to grow, and somewhat interestingly, the cannabis industry kind of leading the way on this, and kind of leapfrogging all these other industries, and actually showing other industry how it could be done.
Yeah, I remember something that you said to me in a conversation we had, a while back at this point, but I think it was it's uranium and pharmaceuticals that are the only other two sort of supply chains that have this kind of tracking. And again, as I alluded to before, that there's certainly not a CPG model in either case. So it is definitely a unique situation that I think we all would like to see be utilized in a stronger, more accepted way. And so it's cool to see that Metrc has sort of embraced all of us and saying, man, you guys have this really cool thing. Like we really want to do this specific thing in this lane and be able to do it, whether it's accounting, or it's lending, or it's supply chain management in and of itself, or it's running a business, is the way Marcus and Rebel is. So it's definitely cool to hear that you guys are at Metrc are in support of and can continue to support the progression of this use of data in the sort of non-traditional reporting sense that it was initially designed for. One thing I will say before we bring in the rest of the panel, or one thing I'll ask, is if you could give us some insight into new states that are coming online, and how sort of the future looks for compliance data, specifically with Metrc, and especially in the context of federal legalization. I know we've been talking about federal legalization since I got in the industry about 10 years ago, but I think we're obviously closer now than we ever have been. So has Metrc begun to get into those conversations without getting too deep in the weeds? And any insight on that would be great for everyone here.
Yeah, I mean, I think cannabis legalization is still continuing to migrate state to state, right? So that doesn't appear to have slowed down. There are a number of different states that are looking to are actually already legalized and are in the process of doing some implementation work. So we expect that to continue to happen. It's like pretty exciting to realize that many of the states are taking advantage of a lot of the best practices that have been established in the cannabis industry. And track and trace has certainly been one of those best practices that I think has really played a pivotal role in helping establish credibility in the regulatory system because of the transparency and the efficiencies and things that are gained from it. So I think as new states come online, I would think that they're going to continue to adopt many of those best practices. With respect to federal legalization, I think it's anybody's guess what's going to happen with federal legalization. I know that there's a number of bills that are out there right now that we're following really closely. And, I think one area that we're really keeping a close eye on is, what federal legalization might mean for those state frameworks that already exist. I think many people on the phone, plus many of the state agencies that are involved with it, there's been millions and millions of dollars invested into those state programs to make them successful. And to a very large extent, they've proven that it's possible to do really well at the state level. So, as the federal government becomes more and more involved and potentially through public policy that legalizes it nationally, I think there's going to be a lot of attention paid to whether or not those state programs continue to preserve and what kind of are the big changes. I think sometimes, when I write about federal legalization, I'm trying to stress that maybe less is more with the federal government, especially given the track record that many of the states have.
Absolutely. It will certainly be interesting to see how it plays out. Lewiskoski, Metrc, thank you so much for that foundational basis for us to work off from here today. And we are going to move on to the panel here in a second, but I do want to pause and see if, Jim, we have any questions from the audience that we want to answer.
Excellent. No questions yet, but I just want to say thank you for everyone for joining. Willie, Hazelina, Sandra, Ashley, thank you for dropping into the comments here. And if you have any questions, drop them into the chat here and we'll get to those. But RJ, back to you.
Awesome. So as we move into this second segment, I'm going to kind of talk to everybody here on the panel. And we'll start with Jared from Lendica, if that's good with you, Jared. And I really want to start on sort of the basis for, the moment that you will, if the aha moment that you realized, compliance data was going to play a role in the services that you're providing. And obviously, please give us some background about those services and whatnot.
Yeah, happy to do it. And nice to meet everyone in the audience. Look, businesses in general are now more than ever relying on the data that powers their operations to use that to get access to capital, access to debt capital. And what Metrc has done and what track and trace systems have done in general have really opened this massive opportunity for cannabis businesses, nutraceutical businesses, obviously not related to Metrc, but businesses in general to better manage their supply chain. And so what Lendica does in a nutshell is uses that data to instantly qualify businesses for debt capital. And then that debt capital can help them delay expenses to vendors and then help them collect actually from their customers a whole lot faster. And so, RJ, you asked about the aha moment. Well, my background's in finance. It was at this credit hedge fund that was making instant decisions in small business and learning a little bit more about the Metrc system and just recognizing, we call it this like treasure chest of data that's sitting at every one of these small businesses. Being able to access this, Lewis used the term API through these really great interfaces, these application interfaces. It makes for like a really great infrastructure and frankly, an industry that could really use the help on the credit side. And so that was the aha moment. And, we're really happy to be able to support some really great businesses and helping them better manage their supply chain, specifically on the capital side.
Absolutely. Very cool. Marko, GreenGrowth, are you sort of seeing that same application? And I think that's pretty, you guys are pretty kind of aligned in your services. So obviously, we're here on your channel, but let's talk about what GreenGrowth does and sort of that compliance aspect, how that plays into what you guys do.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you guys for having me, and a pleasure to meet everybody on the panel and then also all the viewers. I'll go ahead and share a little bit about us. So my name is Marko Glisic. I'm an audit partner at Green Road CPAs. We're a full-scale CPA firm, handling tax, audits, and outsourced accounting and finance. So we really work with over 600 clients, ranging from small startup companies just starting off over to publicly traded companies with hundreds of millions in revenues. And, being a CPA, you kind of realize in a business that's heavily dependent on inventory and supply chain, how important the data is. And kind of to Jared's point, let's say you have a client that's looking to go through a debt offering, right? And they're looking to, let's say, get a credit line on their inventory, right? The lender will want to understand what their supply chain looks like. What does their data look like? And in cannabis, which now unfortunately is still federally illegal, it's even more so important, just even from the basics of, being able to underwrite the loan, just being able to make sure you do all your other due diligence, having, a good data system, a good compliance system, like Metrc, that you're able to kind of access into and pull a lot of that data, just speeds up that process so much faster, right? And this goes back into the company then, if you're able to get that working capital loan, you can scale your business a lot quicker. I'll also, and that's just one use case, right? I mean, I think on our end, we see it so often that, maybe a good one we went through recently is, we're auditing a company that's looking to go public up in Canada. And obviously for them, it's a very big milestone, right? Being able to go public, being able to raise a lot of money and then really take your business to the next level. Well, one of the balances you need to audit in the balance sheet is inventory as well, right? And if you're there around December 31 and you can actually observe the inventory, it's a lot easier. But let's say now we're in January or February, you need to observe the inventory now and be able to roll back those inventory quantities back December 31. The only way you can do that is you really need to understand, what was purchased, what was manufactured, what was sold through. And absent having a perpetual inventory system, good compliance system, you can't really do that. And in this case, luckily, these guys, being in a state where Metrc was in place, it was something we're able to very easily leverage and get there. And then you look at in their case, it would have made a difference of then, being able to go public or not, and really taking their business to next level. So 100%, I think on our end, we see it quite a bit.
Yeah, and I'd like to just tack onto that, and I see Nicole brought up a really good point around data privacy and around, how is this data being used? And so, if it's okay with the panel, maybe this would be a good discussion topic. I can, take the first crack at it. But Nicole, you're absolutely right. The data privacy is incredibly important. I can speak on behalf of Lendica, but I'm sure the rest of the panel would agree that in our case, we actually never see the data until it's explicitly shared by the customer, in this case, our lender. But what I will say about the data and why it's important to share is that it's actually your asset. It's not even, to an extent, Metrc's asset. It's not the ERP system that you're using's asset. It's your asset. And, being an asset, you should use it to your advantage. In Lendica's case, we'll take that data once it's shared, and then because we have this system that's built on top of data that is coming from places like Metrc, the more data that we have access to that you share, the more information we have about the business. Ultimately, we're able to do a better job of underwriting. And when we can get a clearer picture on the underwriting, that actually means lower rates. In fact, we've seen businesses that will share additional data and that will increase their credit line and actually decrease their borrowing costs, their financing rates. And so really good point. You never want to just pass over data into the wrong hands, because who knows where it's going. But when it's in a trusted relationship and you're able to share, it's actually to your advantage, and it can mean better credit at better pricing. So glad you brought that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jared, thanks for jumping in there. I want to kick it over to Stefan Johnson from Outspoke to discuss that a little bit further as well. So Steph, why don't we talk a little bit about what Outspoke does and the use of that data, how it's, to Jared's point, absolutely an asset that should be leveraged, and how Outspoke is keeping data private, but also allowing it to be leveraged.
It's a really interesting question. And in fact, I really view this as one of the differentiations between a point of sale system, for example, which oftentimes point of sale systems are actively out there aggregating and selling your data for the use of other people. What we at Outspoke do is we tap into your data. And Jared, that was a great point. That's exactly the way we view it. Your data is your data, and it's an asset to mobilize at your direction. And so we've developed technology that allows you to seamlessly share very focused data to achieve efficiencies in business operations and relationship management, but only once you've authorized it, and only between the parties that you've authorized the visibility or the transparency. That's something that we spend a ton of time on. In fact, when you talk about picking a lane, that is specifically the lane that we've picked. Because when you do start to authorize the sharing of this data, some amazing use cases come out. Automating things like first in, first out reporting, automating par reordering, right, can create efficiencies that really matter. And when you start to look at markets and how they progress in cannabis, you can look at the Oregon market, for example, and some of the oversupply conditions that have resulted there. And you can see how important it is to start to create efficiencies and really condense your margins so that you have the ability to succeed, compete, and thrive in any market.
And Steph, I want to touch on your aha moment, right? Especially as your background as a cultivator, and I don't want to speak for you, but a High Times Cup isn't a bad award to catch back in the old Prop 215 days in California. So, somebody who kind of lived the life and then had that aha moment and sort of pivoted everything that they were working on. Maybe you could talk to that and in the sort of in the context of privacy and the asset concept.
Well, I know we didn't talk about this before, but it's an amazing softball for me because the truth is I was developing technology in my own garden as a cultivator. I did an R&D perpetual garden for about 10 years. And I was doing a harvest every 2 weeks. And I was integrating systems to take a look at metrics, take pictures, right, record environmental conditions, and I was storing them in a database. I started to, just because in 2017, this is probably more a little predating that, 2014 in California, I was managing my relationships directly with buyers. And I was having conversations about product that existed. I was having conversations about product that hadn't existed yet, that it was coming down the pipeline, and trying to allow my buyers to have information. And so just created a website that was piping in this data so that buyers could go there and take a look at what was available and look at pictures of it, look at different quality metrics. We were using data to estimate harvest times, right, for example. And there was this moment where it clicked that what I was doing was delivering data from one side of the supply chain to the other. And I remember I sat there kind of having one of those like, whoa, what's going on here moments. And I was like looking at all the stages in the supply chain where you can add data by add value by shipping data forward. I mean, everything from, making decisions to, how you manufacture things, how you store things, first in, first out reporting, to, adding a picture of a plant to a package, right? Anything that can add value to increase the customer experience benefits everybody throughout the supply chain. So for me, having that, this was before Metrc, this is before Track and Trace. When Track and Trace came along, I was like, well, Jesus, look, this is the infrastructure that we can use to, deploy this value throughout the supply chain. So yeah, that's my aha moment.
Very cool. One thing I want to do before we break into this segment and ask questions, I would love, Lewis, for you to touch on this as well. I hear all kinds of crazy things like, I heard this crazy idea that Metrc was facilitating robberies in California by passing along information to people. And obviously, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about who has access to what, how this is being used at the place, right, the collection point, and that being Metrc. So I think it'd be great to have you just touch on that briefly before we go into questions.
I think that M button, yep.
Sorry, I had the other chat function in the way. Again, still having troubles with that. Thanks for letting me talk about that, RJ. For sure, we don't share any data, right? So our contracts are with government agencies, and so the government agencies that we contract with are the ones who own that data that's in our system, and we don't share it with anyone. What governments have asked us to do, though, is for us to create automated ways in which licensees can share their information with important stakeholders that they have business functions with. And so it's created such that through the API where third-party integrator like Lendica or a point of sale system or an ERP system integrates in with Metrc, and they're able to integrate, but they can't see anything until they get a handshake from the licensee that says, I'll give you a key, and then the exchange of information can occur. So we don't share any information. We certainly don't share information to aid and abet criminal activity, but we don't do it for any other reason either. But we do, like as per request from our government contractors, and which frankly came from licensees, need to be able to streamline their business systems to report compliance data while they're doing their normal business practices. So no data shared by Metrc at all, but we do create functionality within the system for licensees, as Jared had mentioned, with a bona fide relationship with somebody to make that decision themselves about how they share the data. And that can be everywhere from other government actors like tax agencies or local jurisdictions to point of sale systems, ERPs, or other interested parties like banks that are doing compliance work, et cetera, et cetera. That's done all through an automated way to streamline it as much as possible.
Awesome. Yeah, I assume that you guys weren't involved in any robberies, but people out there are crazy. So let's clear the air while we can.
Yeah, be clear. We've ruled that out. We've ruled that out as anything we're going to do.
Jim, are we seeing any questions coming up in the chat that we want to take a shot at?
Yeah, we've got some questions here. So let's just start with the question that Avita brought up for Lendica. Do you work with distros on the consignment model? For Jared.
Great question, Avita. Absolutely. Again, Lendica can help with a variety of financing. In fact, RMS, I don't know what that stands for, but there's a question around securing money for acquisitions. Very cool. That might be a separate discussion that we can talk about afterwards. But our primary focus and where we're seeing most of our customers leverage Lendica is specifically within the supply chain. And so again, if you are a distributor and you're holding inventory, maybe as an example, it can be really helpful to generate what we would call flow in the supply chain. And so that's delaying all the payments to your vendors or whomever goods you're going to be eventually selling, and then collecting early from the customer. Maybe they're, in this case, a retailer or some processor of sorts. And so it is a really helpful model. And certainly many of our customers are in this distribution space. So would be happy to take a look, or we can schedule something afterwards. But great question.
Thanks, Jared.
Excellent. And then we've got another one here from Bobby, and it's going to probably be for Lewis here. And Bobby says, as compliance and regulations continue to change, Metrc interface will be updated. Will Metrc require their existing POS partners to update their POS software accordingly as well, such as naming conventions?
Yeah, so on many occasions, we have continued to evolve the system to keep pace with all of the different regulatory changes that happen. And so it's not uncommon at all for those changes to require third-party integrators into the system, like point-of-sale systems, ERPs, everything that I mentioned, to have to do some development work in their systems to keep pace with that as well. So I think that is a process that continues to improve over time. But we absolutely communicate out to everyone, so everyone's at least aware of when things are changing in the system, and when changes need to be made, for sure.
I'll just say you guys do a great job of that. Give a lot of lead time, a lot of great information, makes it really easy on tech teams.
Thanks, Stefan.
Yep.
All right, cool. Then we've got some more questions, but we should consider moving forward with the rest of the conversation here, and we'll drop the rest of the questions in as we see fit.
Yeah,
and Avita, I can happy to answer that again offline. But
yep.
We'll make sure that
just very quickly, if you haven't RSVP'd through Eventbrite, it'll be open until tomorrow. You got it in there, get your email in there, and we'll make sure that you have everyone's contact info if it's not already in the YouTube link and all that stuff as well. So make sure everyone's able to contact everyone and have some of these deeper dives. Obviously, part of the reason we're all here today is to top level what we do and to have these conversations deeper as we go. So thanks for everybody for putting in some input on there, and let's keep these questions coming there. Again, this is your conversation, so keep helping us drive it. So I want to bring in Marcus because we haven't heard from him yet. Marcus from Rebel and of course Community Growth Partners up in Massachusetts. Marcus, why don't you talk to the people a little bit about, again, what CGP is doing up there, Rebel, and really how compliance data plays a role in just simply running your retail.
Sure. Thanks, RJ. Appreciate the invite, as well as the other panelists. Really happy to be here. Yeah, just a little bit about myself and the company. So I'm Vice President of Community Growth Partners. We're a vertically integrated cannabis company based out of Massachusetts. By vertically integrated, for those that don't know, we have multiple licenses. So we have retail, cultivation, product manufacturing, as well as delivery licensing as well. As of last month, we were lucky enough to capture delivery. So we've got 4 licenses here in Massachusetts. Our license that has been operational since September 2020 is our retail license. So most people know us by way of our Rebel dispensary in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, in Western Mass, beautiful Berkshire County. For anyone that's interested in checking that out, I've added a link here in my name description, letsrebel.com. And if you are anywhere in Western Mass or close by, I definitely invite you to visit. We're about 2 hours from NYC. We get a lot of weekend Brooklynites and New Yorkers coming by, so please pay us a visit. And yeah, I would say outside of being a VP of a legal cannabis company, I am a longtime and unapologetic cannabis connoisseur myself. I have been since the late 90s, so definitely have a lot of love and passion for the plant. I've also been an active cultivator for the past 11 years. And for 7 of those 11 years, I've been working with my own genetics. So just, cannabis genetics and cultivation and just a general love for the plant were some of the activities that got me interested in the legal industry here in Massachusetts. And started to get involved in the legal industry around 2018. And I joined Community Growth Partners as a founding member in 2019. So that's just a little bit about my legal cannabis background. Prior to joining Community Growth Partners, I spent about 13 years in the tech sector in a variety of different roles. I've had a career in application support, systems administration. I've done enterprise infrastructure management, and in a variety of different fields as well. So I've worked in biotech and pharmaceuticals before, investment banking, and I spent the last 6 years of my IT career working in the semiconductors and IoT industry. So, it's just, I guess, I was afforded the opportunity to take a lot of my expertise from tech and apply that here in my role at Community Growth Partners, where I'm very central to driving our technology strategy, developing that strategy, as well as building the ecosystems that we use on a day-to-day basis to power the business. So just to kind of be a bit of my background, you had mentioned an aha moment earlier, RJ. I don't know if I've really had an aha moment yet. It's kind of been more like an oh crap moment here or there, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. But just generally speaking, I think one thing that makes us a bit different from a lot of companies in the field is we're very much a data-centric company. We're very data-driven as far as our strategy. We take data very seriously. And, just as a tech guy, understanding that you can extract data from pretty much any software appliance is something that I've tried to do and tried to benefit from, in my role and, for us as a company. And, from day one, that's been central to our ethos, is how do we best utilize data and the tools that we're using to power the business and to drive the business. And as many people here have mentioned, obviously as a seed to sale tracking platform, Metrc, is very integral to providing a lot of that data. And, one thing I will say, it was interesting. One thing I heard mentioned earlier is, point of sale systems as opposed to compliance systems. I think there's a big focus on point of sale and e-commerce and the side of the business that drives revenue, the side of the especially if you're a retail establishment, the side of the business that's getting customers through the door, or maybe even the marketing side, the SEO side of the business. You know, you want to have great brand placement. You want to make sure you're tracking online so you can attract those customers. You know, typically I think compliance data is kind of like a secondary consideration for a lot of business operators, and that's almost to their detriment at some point. You know, it is a regulatory requirement for businesses, you know, especially if you're a retail or cultivation or any kind of plant touching side of the business, to establish and integrate your seed to sale tracking to, you know, your day-to-day business operations. But I think outside of that, most people don't really give it too much consideration. I think there's kind of an undeserved reputation that Metrc has of being like a scary system. And, you know, it's like, hey, if compliance is working, it's working. If it's not working, oh my God, we're getting audited. But there's not too much of a deep dive into, you know, the next layer available in the system, you know, as far as, you know, what can we do with this data to help make business decisions? And I think, you know, more of that focus is usually put on the point of sale system. And I can tell you that, you know, we've spent a lot of time at Community Growth Partners, you know, really trying to extract as much data as we can from various pieces of software in our technology stack, you know, and setting up a data warehouse and utilizing, you know, tools that we can generate metrics from that data. And for a while, you know, things have definitely changed a lot in recent years. But I can tell you, when I started really looking seriously at offerings, you know, right at the top of 2019, I would say there were a lot of immature offerings as far as software capabilities with a lot of these systems. And at that time, I would say, at least publicly, there weren't too many vendors like Outspoke, for example, that, you know, openly advertise the fact that they integrated directly with this critical data, and, you know, we're able to translate that data for a business to utilize for beneficial purposes. So I think from that, you know, that's kind of why I've said, you know, I've had more oh crap moments, I think, of kind of doing the merry-go-round, you know, trying to recreate the wheel, trying to use, I think, substandard data from, you know, lackluster systems, kind of as a best you can get approach. And now I would definitely say, you know, post-COVID, you know, let's give COVID a little credit. I think people had, you know, the opportunity to really sit down and re-engineer a lot of things. But I would say post-COVID, you know, I'm seeing a lot more advanced offerings, you know, of companies like Outspoke that, you know, are taking actual true data, you know, because Metrc really is a point of truth. You know, a point of sale system can have bad reporting, you know, whereas I think the reporting in Metrc is going to be much more true to form, you know, and there are vendors now that can integrate directly with this true data and kind of give, you know, customers a true sense of visibility into every single aspect of the business. So, you know, that's something we've definitely done at Rebel, our dispensary, our retail establishment, and it's definitely something that we are thinking forward towards doing through the rest of 2022 as we bring online the next arms of our business. You know, like I mentioned before, we've got cultivation, product manufacturing, and now home delivery coming on board. You know, the home delivery aspect, I think, very much kind of mirrors retail in regards to being very sales facing, but we're very much looking at ways we can also interpret our cultivation data to feed into those retail cycles and maybe kind of optimize, you know, sell-through reporting and things of that nature. And we've also done, you know, a lot of analysis of the brands that we sell, and we're looking forward to using that same level of data to, you know, place our brands that we're bringing to market, you know, in the best possible position for us to engage in wholesale. So yeah, I mean, that's just kind of where we are, you know, definitely an exciting place, I think, to be in the industry. You know, I'm definitely very grateful to have the skill set that I have, as well as to be a part of, you know, a forward-thinking company that's able to exact on some of these, you know, lofty goals, you know, as far as participating in this market.
Thank you for that, Marcus. Yeah, I think, you know, I think the thing that everyone here from the audience perspective needs to understand is that there are those oh crap moments, right? Like, you know, Lewis, you know, sorry to say this, like Metrc sometimes doesn't work, right? AWS doesn't sometimes work. Gmail doesn't sometimes work. Like, these things happen. This is technology, right? But I think, Marcus, to your point, you know, it's sort of let's get past the crap and start focusing on the diamonds, if you will, and how we get that out of here. And you talked about, you know, sort of the progression of using it just beyond sort of a monitoring system, but sort of starting to think about product creation. And there were some questions around some cultivation things like that. Do you foresee, and again, I don't want you to let any secrets out of the bag here, but do you foresee sort of making data-driven decisions around maybe how much you're planting or what you're producing and things of that nature?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think ERP systems were mentioned earlier, and this I think is a great example. We when we started retail, we looked at pretty much every point of sale offering out there, and we looked at every e-commerce offering out there, and we found that there were a lot of great features in all of them, but also a lot of disadvantages. Without naming any particular names, I don't think there's really any perfectly constructed piece of cannabis software at this time. And so what we've had to do is find ancillary products to help mitigate some of those disadvantages, I guess is probably the best way to say it. And we've done a pretty good job of putting some band-aids around things. Now, when it comes to cultivation and product manufacturing, I've been demoing pretty much every cannabis-specific ERP system that's on the market right now. And I can tell you that there's been a lot of similarities in that process where they might have some good features, but then there are some things that don't necessarily work the right way. Or I think somebody mentioned earlier, I saw a question earlier about New Jersey Metrc integration. And one point I did want to bring up, to Lewis's defense, Metrc is in a lot of markets, but these guys are also beholden to the regulations of each particular submarket in each particular state. And I can tell you that, Massachusetts is night and day from California, even when it comes to, categories in Metrc, just as one example. And, I think finding a software vendor and more so, the partners at that firm that, understand your vision, especially for a company like us that has a lot of asks in regards to, feature requests, and being able to deliver a product that not only has the features we want, but is also compliant enough to work within our regulatory model has been very, very much a challenge. We are considerably still a newer market, I think, to the nation. We've really only had retail sales live for a couple of years now. And I can tell you that a lot of companies aren't like Outspoke. Every company can't just, I think, break that mold and really fit the regulatory framework to match Massachusetts in the way that we want. And a big part of that is, they just try to take, Cali Metrc stuff and copy it over to Massachusetts. And it's not really apples for apples in every single case. And so there's been conversations we've had with, other partners, colleagues in the Massachusetts industry, some of whom are our current customers for the retail store that have told us like, hey, we've done the same digging down, this hole that you have. And we've actually found it's better to just use Metrc for some of these functions, So I think it really depends on, what you're trying to do as a business. I think for a firm like ours, where we're trying to really do a lot in regards to analytics and reporting, it's a tough pill to swallow to really understand that you might not just have the capabilities you want, out the bat, and maybe you take the 75% you can to get started, because that's always the chief consideration. You're going to bleed money standing up a license, right? So at some point you really need to get to market and get to generating revenue and quote unquote pick up the pieces afterwards, but yeah, you can't necessarily be scared to do things directly in Metrc if that is a possibility. There are some things we want to do on the cultivation side as far as tracking, cultivation KPIs to really, I think, standardize some level of consistency around the products we want to offer. I don't know if we're quite there yet, but it's definitely, on the roadmap. And I think when there is the right partner there to enable some of those, functions that we want requested, we'll see how things go.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marcus, for that, for kind of diving deep in there. And Jared, I want to kick it over to you real quick. There's been a lot of questions about sort of data and how, you're using data to make better lending decisions. And so kind of in the things that Marcus is talking about and touching on, whether it's, gathering data from an ERP, a POS, what have you, or it's a Metrc integration, maybe you could talk a little bit to, whether you use kind of Rebel or as a pseudo use case, or you talk about another use case, but maybe break it down just a little bit about how, what kind of data is being used and how that sort of facilitates the process to, again, maybe get better rates or a bigger amount of money.
Sure. Great question. We have a saying here at Lendica, and someone actually asked about collateral. I think maybe it was Avita asking about collateral. We have an expression that actually data is the best form of collateral, which is kind of corny, but we really believe it to be true. And so maybe I can kind of use like whether it's Rebel or just a business in general as a use case. The way that our business works, the way that most of our customers learn about Lendica and then interact with the platform are through our integrations with some of the technology companies that power the industry. So someone had a question on ERP or wholesale marketplace systems, think Flourish, think Apex, think Leaf Trade, Distru. These kinds of groups are examples of, at least a couple of them are partners on the point of sale side. There's lots of them. Marcus mentioned there's maybe not, the perfect group. Trees is certainly one that has done a really great job and has great data integration on the back end. And so, the way that Lendica works is we actually sit right on top of these platforms. And so if you're an operator and you're looking at your ERP system, trying to figure out either inbound invoices from customers or outbound payments to vendors, there's just a couple of clicks of a button where you can either delay those payments or get paid ahead of time. And so that's, we talk about this flow, this function of flow. You can have a cash flow, accretive cash flow, as opposed to constantly feeling like you're catching up on the cash flow. Just to address the point on data, we look to see some of these relationships. I know, Outspoke does a great job of managing relationships, and certainly something that helps the businesses interact between, the sales process. We use these relationships as a great barometer for the credit risk that will eventually be taking between maybe a brand and then retailer or cultivator and processor. And so that's the way that Lendica works in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
Hey,
I want to, yes.
I'm sorry. Can I just touch on one quick question here from Bobby? Where's the unicorn software? I just want to make this clear. It doesn't exist. That's why it's a unicorn. But on a serious note, there's a lot of touch points when you're running this business. I think even outside of compliance software, right? If you're retail, you need some type of point of sale to power the business. But even if once we get outside of the cannabis touching aspects of the business, you're going to have some type of marketing software. You're going to have some type of e-commerce software. And so I think, looking for a unicorn, unfortunately, you're never going to find it. I do just want to make a couple of points because this comes up a lot when people just ask about overall tech strategy. It is an ecosystem. You're going to have to piece things together. If you can find a nice consolidated platform that can, get the most and build on top of that via API integration, that might be one way to look, number one. Number two, you definitely have to consider your budget. Don't come out the gate trying to spend loads and loads and loads on software that you're not exactly sure what it does. Again, it's very important for you to always get revenue positive as an operator. And I would say, lastly, we're very much in a growth stage at Community Growth Partners. I would like to say at some point we'll have enough of a budget where, we could potentially do some in-house development, but keep in mind that is a very considerable cost, but that's probably the last mile to look at is if it's not offered out there, you can find, a smart dev to create that functionality for you. And that I think is really the trifecta for kind of getting that unicorn you're looking for. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that just as a general strategy. If you had any questions or if it's something you're thinking about, as you're engaging in, software discussions or whatever for your business.
Yeah, Marcus, thanks for jumping in there. That's a great point. I don't think there's a unicorn software in any industry, right? I mean, Salesforce still integrates with QuickBooks, so I don't know that it exists, right? So I do want to kick it over to Marko, and Marko, can you maybe talk us through some use case kind of concept here and dig a little bit more deeper in how the data plays into the work that GreenGrowth does?
Yeah, no, absolutely, RJ. Yes, I'd say, as part of our service offering, we work with clients. We always kind of try to understand how can we strategically move their business, right? And so as you look at that P&L of really any cannabis company, the biggest line item, the biggest cost driver is going to be your cost of goods sold, right? Probably anywhere from 50% of your revenues up to 75, 80%, depending on the size of the company, what vertical you're in, right? Are you a cultivator, retailer, manufacturer, brand, or whatnot? And really to kind of have a real conversation and really drive strategy in that area, you can't really do it without understanding your supply chain, really without understanding your inventory. And so really what that data does is just makes that conversation very data centric and analytical, right? As opposed to talking about anecdotal information. Oh, hey, Jimmy down in receiving, forgot to input the order, right? We can actually look at the data holistically and see, where the opportunity is, right? So now you kind of start thinking about it. Okay, even let's say a smaller cannabis company, your cost of goods sold is, let's say, going to be anywhere from $1 million to $2 million in your P&L on an annual basis. If you can drive a 10% change in that cost item, that's $200,000 that's happening in perpetuity, right? So now you kind of start thinking, well, gee, with $200,000, what can I do, right? On one hand, it'd be great to kind of distribute that down to, myself and my partners, my shareholders, right? Or it's something I can reinvest back into the business to really kind of continue growing the business, or, hey, let me just take that and each year put $200,000 in the stock market at 5% return, and you'll get a decent return and gain some wealth, right? But really, without having that data, it's hard to have that conversation, right? And then once you have it, that's where you kind of really want to sit with a team and then strategically start thinking through it. Hey, what's how can we improve things, right? Is it that we have a lot of shrinkage? I think something we see with a lot of cannabis companies, that shrinkage can be easily up to 5% of their revenues, which is just mind blowing. Or hey, is it that our aged inventory, inventory 90 plus days, 120 plus days is a really significant amount. What if that is $300,000 that we're sitting on, we're not selling through? If we can do the right discounting, if we can unload that inventory, well, that's now cash flow that enters into the business that we can now reinvest into the right kind of inventory, right? So now that's going to feed into your purchasing decisions, your purchasing SOPs. There's our store manager on a retail end when they're buying. Are they really looking at our inventory buckets and seeing what are the products that are moving well, what are the ones that are moving well, at the sell-through data, right? The inventory turnover data. Or hey, is it that maybe as we're buying, let's say I'm a manufacturer, is it that maybe we can drive a lot of change by lowering our raw materials, right? And is it that maybe we ought to be talking to this supplier versus this supplier, and having a small change of a couple of percentage points is actually going to drive a big change in terms of the dollars. And you can't really have those conversations absent having that data. I think recent one we had, which was kind of interesting, was when you're dealing with cultivators, right? A lot of your cost structure is fixed. You kind of start thinking your rent, your electric, your labor. Some labor is more variable. I guess your trimming costs may be more so dependent on the amount of pounds you produce, but largely a lot of your costs are fixed, right? And so a big function of your cost per pound comes down to, how much productive output can you have out of that facility, right? And absolutely having that data, seeing kind of historically what we have produced, what have our yields been, how does that cost per pound break out by different cost driver? It's really kind of hard to make those decisions and really, drive the change. And that's just a couple of examples. I think as you kind of start looking at it and brainstorming, it just really becomes unlimited source of data. And I think kind of one of my pet peeves very often is that when it comes to things like that, absent having data, people are more talking about completeness and accuracy information as opposed to saying, hey, information is good, and now let's move on to strategy. And so just having that system, having that data is just can be really a game changer for a lot of organizations.
Totally. And Steph, I want to kick it over to you to talk about cost of goods sold, because I know Outspoke is really reducing and I want to say repurposing labor spends in some really interesting ways. So maybe you could kind of build off of Marko.
Yeah, no, some really good points there. And I really like what you ended on there, Marko. I mean, I spent a decade in corporate strategy with Charles Schwab before I got into the cannabis industry 15 years ago. And A lot of what they did really well was they managed data so they could focus on relationships. They could focus on things that really help growth and expansion. It's one of the amazing opportunities in the cannabis industry is, we're out there scrambling, getting new accounts, making more and more product to grow into markets. That's success that brings on what I like to call good problems. And how do you maintain that? What is your infrastructure for managing that? You have to automate, and you have to be thinking about how you can manage relationships at scale as you grow up. So, another thing that you said, Marko, was about looking at this data that tells you that you have product that's a little bit older, looking at shrinkage, what is kind of on the table or off the table that we can bring back on the table, right? And so when we look at how we can automate and mobilize compliance data, we look at value on a standardized infrastructure that can be delivered at scale across multiple states in a very organized and simple way. One example of that is PAR reporting. So we worked with a client who was spending a lot of time going out and getting data. ERP systems, they don't talk to each other, right? You have to go call a retailer and say, what are our levels? What do you need to reorder? That retailer goes and runs a report. They sit there, when you look at it, they run some formulas a lot of times, which still boggles my mind that they have to do manual work in Excel after pulling data from an ERP system, but that's for another conversation another day. But we were able to, leveraging the compliance infrastructure and the power of secure, focused data sharing, to automate this process at scale. And what that did is it gave their representatives more time back. That's more time to manage existing relationships. I mean, it's cliche, but to ask how their vacation was, right? I mean, at Schwab, what we did really well for client loyalty in the B2B space was we let the data be automated and transparent. So everybody knew what the data was, and we could spend more time talking about the things that mattered. What's going on with your business? What are your goals, right? And so these are the type of things that we allow sales teams, and I don't even like to call them sales teams, I like to call them relationship managers, right? To spend more time focusing on, and so they can build scalable business, manage relationships at scale across multiple markets. One other thing that I find is a really interesting use case that I'm just going to throw in here for a little bonus points here, use case bonus points. Essentially, when it comes to FIFO reporting, there's multiple ways to look at it. And our common goal is to have products that are the right products are in the right place. When the customer goes to buy it, it's there, right? The product is high quality, right? So they're not tasting stale product and having negative brand interactions. And so a key part of that is first in, first out inventory management. So there's a lot of different ways to manage that. Traditionally, retailers will look at days on hand data, and that tends to be readily available in point of sale systems, for example. You can take it a level back with Metrc and track and trace data, because the packaged on data actually ships with that data. And so now you can start to see a little bit more of an accurate view of what it's not just first in, first out, it's first made, first out, right? And so now you can manage freshness in a more granular fashion, leveraging that mobilized data. And one of the things that really excites me is we're working on technology that can allow people to share, for example, cultivators that want to ensure that when their products are consumed by the end customer, it's the highest, the freshest, the best quality experience. We're working on ways to allow them to expose actual harvest data in a scalable, structured, controlled, secure way, so that retailers can have that data and make decisions on what product, which lot, which package they want to sell out of, so that the customer is going to have the freshest product and the best possible experience. And that all supports the efficiency, the effectiveness of the supply chain. It's really exciting stuff to me, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
Thanks, Stefan. Lewis, I just want to kick it over to you. I know there was some talk about some of the let's call them pain points, and also some of the progression in Jersey and things. So I just wanted to give you the floor if you wanted to add anything to the conversation that's going on here.
Oh, no, thanks. So appreciate that. As far as Oklahoma and New Jersey are going, we are continuing to work and move forward in both states. It's still a little too early to tell exactly what is going to happen and when, but we're certainly prepared for that. I wanted to talk too, just like a little bit just about what we were just hearing from Stefan about the importance of some of the track and trace data, and what really kind of distinguishes it from other data is really important to mention, and that it's collecting data all the way through the supply chain, which is traceable all the way back. And so in the same way Jared is talking about the possibility of sharing cultivation data within the confines of privacy and security that we talked about earlier. That's a possibility of sharing that back to cultivators as well when they start to get feedback from customers. So there's a lot of really interesting ways to collect data to continue to drive value for customers based on what customers are telling. So I thought that was a really interesting point that Stefan made. And I think just one other thing is the technology market continues to grow. I think there's probably a lot of companies that are using Metrc as one of their primary business systems. So it's gonna be really interesting to see as the technology continues to advance and it continues to meet many more of the needs, how they're going to use track and trace data that was initially intended for stopping inversion and diversion is actually going to start to drive even more innovation and more thought to where the entire institution around legalization becomes more of a thinking infrastructure than just a reporting compliance structure.
Totally. And one thing I want to hear say to that point before we open for questions here, but it's sort of like, you're sort of the front line of defense, right, Lewis, in Metrc of diversion and maybe bringing things into supply chains that don't belong there, right? But you look at what Lendica is doing, what GreenGrowth is doing. There's sort of another layer there of protection. So let's say something doesn't look right, it gets through to a retailer, okay, or it gets through to the regulator, okay, fine, but when you talk about an audit for gaining access to capital, or you talk about going public, or your accountant getting involved, again, there's things there that you can't avoid that you would maybe be able to avoid without Metrc. So I think it's an interesting dynamic between this was created for a regulation or regulatory concept, but you actually have sort of third parties expanding sort of the regulation themselves in a private sense, which is pretty cool. So if anyone from the panel wants to jump in and add anything else before we go to questions, I'll open the floor up if anybody wants to add anything that's what's been said.
I think we got to give Laura a mic at some point. She's got a lot of good ideas here in this.
I think we need to bring maybe an audience.
Let's get Laura in the mix. Yeah, I think so.
Absolutely. Well, if nothing else, we'll kick it over to Jim. Jim, are there any other good questions that we should ask the panel about?
Yeah, just hot take real quick for Lewis. Is there any ETA for Oklahoma Metrc?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, we're continuing to monitor that very closely. We're optimistic that there's going to be some movement on that here early in the year, and so we're thinking through very thoroughly, what kind of work we need to be ready to do on our end. Most of the licensees are already credentialed into the system. Some of them may not have been using it as much since what was it, like middle of last year when the changes occurred. So I think we're preparing ourselves to be able to do a lot more training in terms of like refreshing people's knowledge of how to use the system. And also by that time, we'll have our learning management system up and running, which is a self-guided training program within a Metrc approved training curriculum that can walk people through, I think it's like we're up to 45 different short modules that help people with their use of Metrc.
Excellent. And another question for Lewis here, kind of building on what Marcus said earlier, how California is not the same as Massachusetts, even in the categories in Metrc. Abbas Syed here says, New Jersey, is there any kind of state that is a little bit similar in the implementation of Metrc so that he can get a little bit more sightline into what to prepare for when New Jersey comes online?
Yeah, I think the great news is that, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of best practices that are being adopted by states to get off to a really good start. There's some tried and true things that have occurred. The best I can tell in New Jersey and many of the other states that are getting ready to come online is that they're following suit with things that will probably help them implement quickly. So we're pretty confident in all of the states that are looking at implementing track and trace. that we could implement very quickly with minimal development work on our system. I don't know if everybody knows, but we've implemented in as early as 60 to 90 days in a state that already had an operational industry. So over all of the years of time, we've been able to really configure or build our system such that we can configure it to meet a lot of different approaches to legalization. So like New Jersey, like many of the other states, we feel like we can move pretty quickly in there to start standing up new systems there as they come online.
Excellent. And last, one more for the hot take. Is there a specific URL or page on your website that has the knowledge base of information on how to use Metrc as a refresher for these modules for some of the operators out there? Nicole Miller is asking.
Yeah, Nicole, you can call our support line or email our support line, and they can get you in touch with our knowledge center. Also, too, if you're already a registered user within Metrc, you can get access into our LMS, and you do that registration through our support line.
Excellent. That's all the questions that are in the chat here. I'll turn it back over to you, RJ.
All right. Well, in that case, I want to thank the entire panel, especially GreenGrowth, for hosting us and producing this this tremendous conversation. We really want to look at this as a sort of a first conversation and see what else we might discuss. And so I think there's been a lot of great questions here. And so, if people want us to continue to have these every couple months or once a quarter and kind of keep things updated, I know speaking on behalf of the panel, I'm sure everyone would be excited to come back and keep the conversation rolling. So Jim dropped an Eventbrite link into the chat. Please use that to, add your information to it so that we can get in touch with you and keep you posted about these conversations. Make sure you can connect with everybody that you want to here. And ultimately, we appreciate everyone for attending and obviously greatly appreciate the panel for coming on and dropping a whole lot of knowledge and not a whole lot of time. So thank you, everybody that was here. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for putting it together,
everyone.
guys. Yeah, great to meet everyone.
All right.
Take care.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
So long.